How are you ding-dong diddly doing there, gamerinos? Hope you're having a flanderific day. So, for today's episode, we're going to listen to this video by Kev Lehman. The video is Why Jesus Chose the Most Demonic Place on Earth for This Moment. It's a really interesting video. It's got some of that historical context, that I love so much. So, without further ado, let's begin.
We are diving into one of the most underrated yet insane moments in Jesus' ministry, his declaration at Caesarea Philippi. Now, if you grew up in church, you've probably heard this passage a million times. So Jesus says to Peter, "And I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." Sounds straightforward, right? Jesus is saying that his church will be unstoppable. Great message. But why did Jesus say this in Caesarea Philippi? Like, why not Jerusalem or Capernaum, his base of ministry? Because this wasn't just any location. Caesarea Philippi was known as one of the darkest, most demonic places in the entire ancient world. And when Jesus stood there, declaring war on the forces of hell, he wasn't just making a statement. He was making a direct challenge to the underworld itself. So today, we're going to break this down. Why was this place so spiritually significant? What did Jesus really mean when he talked about the gates of Hades, and how does this connect to the broader war between God and the supernatural rebels in the unseen realm? I'm Kev Lehman, a pastor and a Christian therapist, and I want to show you that the Bible is more than mere history. It's a sweeping, supernatural saga of divine war, ancient beings, and a veiled kingdom unfolding before our very eyes. Let's pierce the veil. So first, we need to talk about Caesarea Philippi itself. This was not your average ancient town. It was built on the southwestern base of Mount Hermon, which, if you've been following along on this channel, you already know is a huge supernatural hotspot in biblical history. But the real centerpiece of Caesarea Philippi was this massive rock formation with a deep cave at its base. And this wasn't just any cave. It was known as the Gates of Hades. Now, in the first century, archaeology has shown that there were several temples built around the cave, including a massive one right in front of it. So you'll see in some of my historic renderings that it looked quite different at the time. The pagans believed this cave was a portal to the underworld that was the dwelling place of supernatural entities. And in front of this cave, they built a shrine to Pan, the half-goat, half-man fertility god associated with chaos, sexuality, and the wild forces of nature. This entire area was a demonic headquarters. People would perform human sacrifices, they would engage in ritual orgies, and then they would worship gods that they believed had the power to influence the spiritual realm. So all of this was happening right around this cave opening. And yet this is the exact place that Jesus chooses to bring his disciples for one of his most important declarations in history. Coincidence? Not a chance. Now, let's get to the moment itself. Jesus and his disciples arrive at Caesarea Philippi, and he asks them the big question: who do people say that the Son of Man is? And the disciples give him a few answers: John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. But then Jesus presses them. He says, "But who do you say that I am?" And this is where Peter nails it. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responds with the absolute mic drop moment. And Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." Boom. Right there. In front of the literal gates of Hades, Jesus says, "I'm building my church here. And the forces of darkness, they will not win." This is so much bigger than some abstract metaphor. Jesus is declaring war against the entire kingdom of darkness at its own doorstep. But what did Jesus...
Okay, so I just want to pause it there real quick and talk about that. So that's pretty awesome that Jesus just walks over to essentially the most famous pagan temple, teabags it, and says that, yeah, well, mine's going to be better than yours. Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. And it really feeds into sassy Jesus too, which I didn't even know. I didn't even know that we were getting sassy Jesus here, but we are. Pretty epic.
Mean when he said upon this rock. So here's where things get a little bit controversial. For centuries, people have debated what Jesus meant when he said, on this rock I will build my church. Some say he was talking about Peter himself because, you know, Peter's name, Petros, means rock. That's the Roman Catholic view, that Peter was the first pope and the church was built on him. Others say Jesus was referring to Peter's confession of faith, that the belief that Jesus is the Christ is the rock the church is built on. But there's a third option. What if Jesus wasn't just talking about Peter or a confession? What if he was literally referring to the massive rock formation they were standing on, the very place known as the gates of Hades? Think about it. Jesus is standing in front of a gigantic rock, a known pagan site where people literally believed the spiritual realm intersected with the physical world. And he says this right here is where he's building his church. Not in a safe, quiet synagogue, not in the Temple of Jerusalem, right in the heart of enemy territory. That is a power move.
Yeah, not only is it a power move, but it's very on brand. Because if you remember in Matthew, it says that like Jesus says, who needs a doctor more, a healthy person or a sick person? So again, who needs the church more, the good people or at least I guess, you know, yeah, I guess you could say like good people, I guess, or really bad people. So this totally tracks. And also, I maybe it's that I'm just really not a fan of the whole idea of a pope, but like, yeah, saying that the idea of a pope has nothing to do with what Jesus said is also very cool to me, because I don't understand that whole deal there. Anyway, let's just move on.
Jesus is essentially saying, I am taking back what belongs to me. I am planting my kingdom right in the middle of enemy lines. And the gates of Hades, they're not strong enough to stop me. So let's talk about this phrase, the gates of Hades shall not prevail. When people hear this, they often think of the church defending itself against an attack from the forces of hell. But that's kind of backwards. Gates are not offensive weapons. They don't attack.
Sorry, it's an ad, and of course I gotta switch it off the Wi-Fi so that the ad will go by quicker. Amazing.
They exist to keep people out, right? So when Jesus says that the gates of Hades will not prevail, he's not saying that the church will barely survive an onslaught from hell. He's saying that the church is the one on the offensive. We are storming their territory, and their defenses will not hold. This is about kingdom expansion. Jesus is telling his disciples, we are taking back what the enemy stole. If you've read Reversing Harman by Michael Heiser, you know that this isn't just about one moment. This connects to a much bigger war, one that started all the way back in Genesis 6 with the rebellion of the Watchers. Mount Hermon, the same region where Caesarea Philippi was located, is the exact place where, according to 1st Enoch, the fallen angels first descended and corrupted humanity. And now Jesus stands in that same region, and he declares, the true Son of God is here. The true kingdom is being established, and the forces of evil are being overthrown. This isn't...
Okay. I just wanted to pause it to say that that's pretty incredible that the Book of Enoch is like, oh yeah, by the way, the Watchers were like cast down here, um, and people are like, oh yeah, this is a portal to the underworld, and then it becomes like a super demonic place, like that. It's a little strange, a little coincidental there. Um, yeah, let's move on.
Just a casual teaching moment. This is a cosmic warfare. And the best part is, Jesus wins. So what does this mean for us? It means that Christianity was never meant to be passive. Jesus didn't build his church to hide in safety. He planted it in enemy territory and said, go take the fight to them. The world belongs to God, and his kingdom is advancing. And no matter how bad things look, no matter how dark the world seems, the gates of Hades will not prevail. The question is, are you on the offense? Because Jesus already declared victory. Now it's just about who's willing to fight for it. In the next video, I'll look at what it means for the...
Yeah, and I believe Paul says somewhere that we are more than conquerors. We are going to watch one more, and then I will call it.
Acts 13.
So this is that one time Paul miraculously made a man blind by testify.
Acts 13 recounts one of the wilder episodes in Paul's early ministry. He and Barnabas are on Cyprus when they run into a magician named Bar-Jesus, also called Elymas. The guy is hanging around the Roman proconsul, Sergius Paulus, trying to turn him away from the gospel. Bad move. Luke writes, Paul looked intently at him and said, "You son of the devil, you enemy of all righteousness, full of deceit and villainy, will you not stop making crooked the straight paths of the Lord? And now, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon you, and you will be blind and unable to see the sun for a time." Immediately, Elymas is struck blind and starts groping around for someone to guide him. Sergius Paulus sees this and is so floored by it, he becomes a Christian. Now, let's ask the question, is this just dramatic storytelling, or are there reasons to think that this actually happened? For starters, Luke tells us that Sergius Paulus was a proconsul, which is a very specific Roman title. At the time of Paul's journey, Cyprus was classified as a senatorial province, which meant it was governed by a proconsul appointed by the Roman Senate. That's opposed to an imperial province, which was ruled by a legate appointed by the emperor, like Judea was. Cyprus became senatorial in 22 BC and stayed that way for a while. Here's why that matters. If Luke was just making stuff up decades later, or writing from some faraway place long after the events, it would have been really easy to get this wrong. Most provinces weren't under proconsuls. And by the time of the Flavian emperors, which is 69 AD onward, Cyprus may have already switched back to imperial control. And if Acts was written after 70 AD, as many skeptical scholars claim, Luke would have been even more likely to use the wrong title unless he had access to eyewitness level detail. But he doesn't. He absolutely nails it. But is Sergius Paulus a real guy? As it turns out, there's an inscription found in Soli on the northern coast of Cyprus that reads, "In the proconsulship of Paulus." It's dated somewhere in the 1st or possibly 2nd century. If it refers to our Sergius Paulus, that's pretty direct confirmation of the guy's existence and office. Even if it's a different Paulus, it still supports the idea that someone from the Paulus family held this role consistent with Acts' account. Wow. And here's where things get extra interesting. Right after that encounter, Paul and Barnabas sailed to Pisidian Antioch. That wasn't the nearest or most obvious next stop. So why go there? Well, we actually have another inscription, this time from Pisidian Antioch, referring to a man named Lucius Sergius Paulus the Younger. The Latin spelling of Paulus matches what we would expect, and Lucius was a super common Roman name. This guy held multiple public offices and was clearly a person of status. It's highly plausible that he was related to the proconsul from Cyprus. So, is this just a coincidence that Paul went straight to the hometown of someone likely related to Sergius Paulus? Or did the newly converted proconsul send Paul to share the gospel with his family? That would definitely explain the travel route and reinforce the idea that this story came from Paul himself. Now, getting back to the miracle, a guy getting struck blind in front of a Roman official.
Okay, I just want to say, Gotta love those little details in there. Like, I mean, I suppose you could make the argument that it's not they're not related, but I mean, it's a little sus. It's a really weird coincidence that if that wasn't the case, that they just so happened to go to this out of the way port town that happened to be run by the same, or with the dude with the same last name. But isn't it all related to that dude? And the fact that we've got historical evidence that there was at least a polis in both cities, very, very strange if it's not, exactly as Testify is describing it here.
Isn't something you would just misremember. Either it happened, or Paul lied about it. And since Luke traveled with Paul, he likely got this story straight from him. The historical details, political accuracy, and archaeological support all point this to being a real story, not some legend that's just made up later. Paul told the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 12:12, "The signs of a true apostle were performed among you, with signs and wonders and mighty work." That is a risky claim to make if it didn't happen, especially considering how some of the Corinthians seem to be skeptical of Paul. So when Acts says Paul blinded a guy, it tracks. This is exactly the kind of stuff Paul pointed to as evidence that he wasn't faking it. Now, if only I had the power to blind a few of the clowns spreading nonsense about Christianity on YouTube, that would make apologetics way more efficient.
Facts. Yeah. And again, it's funny because you take a look at, I'm not going to name any names, but you take a look at some religions and it's like, oh yeah, no, you got to believe me because you should do that. But Paul is like, yeah, I've got the miracles to back it up here. It's not just, listen to what I'm saying. It's listen to what I'm saying and see what I'm doing. So, thank you for watching. If anyone tuned in, I really appreciate it. Thank you to the YouTube crowd who's going to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.